The first case presented on a seventh day, which is the day I process invoices and do not want to be interrupted. Merchant crew member 1 Denvar Asith, male, mid-career, arrived at the station infirmary with a fever of 39.4 and a rash that had no business being on an arm in that configuration. I am not a physician. We have a medic, Parath, who is not a physician either but is the closest thing Corridor Kethnal has to one inside 4 hours of transit. Parath looked at the rash and at me and said, with the careful enunciation of someone who does not want to say what she is about to say, that she thought it was Vethali hemorrhagic fever. I asked her to repeat herself. She repeated herself. I asked when she had last been wrong about something of this kind. She said, twice in 14 years, and both times the patient had recovered. This was not, it turned out, going to be one of those times. By the time I had locked down the merchant vessel and restricted Denvar's crew to the quarantine wing, 2 more of them were symptomatic. By the time I had filed our first urgent care request to Keth Sector Medical Coordination and received an acknowledgement, not a reply, an acknowledgement, the count was 4. The merchant captain, a steady woman named Kalith Orvari who I had done business with for 11 years, was the 4th. Vethali hemorrhagic fever is not on its own a death sentence. There is an antitoxin compound. It is not rare. It is not expensive. It requires, however, a pharmaceutical manufacturing environment to produce and a cold chain logistics setup to transport. And the only pharmaceutical infrastructure in Corridor Kethnal belonged to a resupply depot on Keth Station Orva 3, which is 9 hours out at best transit speed, and Keth Station Orva 3 had not answered my secondary urgent care request or my tertiary one. On the morning of the second day, I sent our one available shuttle to Orva 3 on a courier run with a hard copy of the request, and a directive that the pilot was not to come back without the antitoxin or a signed explanation of why it was unavailable. Then I went to the station's emergency communications array, and I did what you do when you have done everything else. I broadcast a general medical distress call on the station's primary emergency band. Then, because I was not certain the primary band had the range, I enabled the legacy broadcast option in the array's secondary menu, the one buried under a submenu labeled, in the original installation documentation, Joint Patrol Notification Protocol, Accordance Period 2379-2481. The documentation noted that the secondary band, Keth Patrol Null 6, was a dissolved accord frequency retained for historical compliance purposes. I did not know what a dissolved accord frequency was precisely. I knew it meant someone had once agreed to listen on it and the equipment still worked. I enabled it. I broadcast on both. Then I went back to managing a quarantine. I want to be precise about what I expected. I expected our shuttle to reach Orva 3 in 9 hours, encounter bureaucratic delay, and return in perhaps 36 to 48 hours with the antitoxin or without it. I expected Keth Sector Medical Coordination to send a response within 24 hours. I expected that Kalith Orvari's fever would peak that night, and that Parath would manage it, and that most of her crew would be uncomfortable for several days, and then recover. I expected a difficult week. I did not expect the vessel that docked at our external mooring at hour 19. I heard it before I saw it. The docking arm engagement mechanism in this station has a distinctive clang, and I had not authorized any docking. I went to the external camera feed and looked at what had latched onto Corridor Kethnal Station 7. It was a patrol corvette, Terran-class old configuration, the hull geometry that had been standard perhaps 50 or 60 years ago, before the rounder lines came in. The markings were readable but worn, the paint oxidized in the slow way of ships that have been cycling through deep corridor vacuum for a long time. The vessel registry on the docking interface read, Callaway's Mark * Joint Corridor Patrol Kethnal 6. Authorization Code, JCPKN 60047. I ran the authorization code through our docking management system. The system returned a result I did not understand immediately. The code was valid, the vessel's classification was current, and the assigned patrol corridor was exactly this one. Then the system added a note in small text: authorization filed under Joint Corridor Patrol Protocol, Keth Null 6 Sector, commission date 2471. Last status update: 2481, patrol cycle active, no completion filed. The year was, at the time of this writing, 2536. I stared at that note for longer than I should have. Then I tried to open a comms channel to the vessel. The channel connected. There was no voice response. There was, instead, an automated system prompt in standard procedural format asking me to confirm the nature of the medical distress call broadcast on Keth Patrol Null 6 at hour 0 of the current incident, and to specify required response materials. I specified required response materials. 40 minutes later, the automated cargo transfer system engaged and began moving sealed containers from the Callaway's Mark S hold to our receiving bay. The containers were labeled in a standard medical logistics format that I had not seen before, because it was the format in use in 2471. The contents list, when I scanned it: broad-spectrum antitoxin compound, general humanoid biological profile, batch date 2472. Sealed cold chain container, integrity confirmed, dosage reference enclosed. 65 years old, the cold chain seal had held. I brought Parath to the receiving bay. She looked at the containers for a moment, then opened one, then read the enclosed dosage reference, then did a calculation on the reference margin with a stylus. She said the compound's active profile matched Vethali hemorrhagic fever within acceptable tolerance, because the base molecular architecture was broad enough to cover most known hemorrhagic fever variants in the relevant biological category, and that the compound was 65 years old, but the sealed integrity indicator was green, and that she was going to administer it to Kalith Orvari first because Kalith Orvari was the sickest. And she would appreciate it if I would leave the infirmary and let her work. I left the infirmary and let her work. I went back to the external camera feed and watched the Callaway's Mark disengage from our docking arm. The vessel's maneuvering thrusters lit in a precise sequence. It turned back toward the corridor line, accelerating smoothly, and resumed what I could only assume was its patrol loop through Keth Null 6. The docking interface cleared its record. The authorization code was logged as mission complete. Kalith Orvari's fever broke 6 hours later. The rest of her crew followed across the next day and a half. Parath said it had been close, the last 2 hours before the compound arrived, and that she would file the incident report with a recommendation that the station maintain a standing stock of the broad-spectrum compound class. I told her to file what she needed to file. Our shuttle returned from Orva 3 31 hours after it had departed. The pilot reported that Orva 3's pharmacy stores had been on temporary hold due to a distribution contract audit, and that the earliest available resupply had been 6 days out. He had the signed explanation. I filed my own incident report with Keth Sector Medical Coordination. In the addendum, I included the docking record for the Callaway's Mark and the authorization code JCP KN 60047, and asked whether Joint Corridor Patrol maintained any active record of that vessel. Keth Sector Medical Coordination forwarded the query to Earth's Joint Corridor Patrol Administrative Office. The Administrative Office replied in 11 days. The reply said that the Joint Corridor Patrol Protocol, Keth Null 6 Sector, had been dissolved in 2481 as part of a sector reorganization. All active patrol vessels had been recalled and decommissioned at that time. No active record existed for a vessel registry designated Callaway's Mark *. The authorization code series JCP KN 60047 was valid under the dissolved protocol, but had not been active in Earth's current patrol management system since 2481. No one, as far as the administrative office was aware, had formally canceled the patrol assignment. No one, as far as the administrative office was aware, had formally recalled the vessel. The administrative office noted that this was irregular and that it would conduct an internal review. I have not heard further. I keep the legacy broadcast option enabled. It costs nothing. The secondary menu still labels it Joint Patrol Notification Protocol, accordance period 2379-2481, and the documentation still calls it a dissolved accord frequency retained for historical compliance purposes. I do not know what the asterisk Callaway's mark asterisk carries in its hold beyond what it brought us, or how it resupplies, or where exactly it is in Corridor Keth 06 on any given day. I know it is still out there. The docking interface shows a valid patrol authorization code, and the last status update in the system still reads, Patrol cycle active, no completion filed. Nobody told it the protocol was dissolved. It is still waiting for someone to file the completion. I have decided not to be the one who does.